Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to talk about quadratic equations and specifically how to solve them using square roots. So we have three different types of solutions that we could have, right? We could have two real solutions, we could have one real solution, or we could have no real solutions. And here's what our equations are going to look like to give us one of those three types of solutions. The first one says if we have x squared equals a positive number, so x squared equals 10, x squared equals 25, just any positive number, we will have two real solutions, and those solutions will just be the positive and the negative of that value, okay? We could have x squared equals 0. So in that case, we would just take the square root of 0, which in that case would just be 0. So there's only one real solution, and that solution is 0. Lastly, we could have x squared equals a negative number, okay? So for Algebra 1, we don't deal with imaginary numbers, we deal with real numbers. So we're just going to say there are no real solutions, and we'll talk about imaginary numbers later on when we do videos on Algebra 2. So those are the three types of solutions that we could have. So let's take a look at some examples. Example number 1, we have 2x squared minus 32 equals 0. So the form that we want this to be in, essentially we're trying to isolate the variable. Okay, so let's add 32 to both sides of this equation. That's going to cancel that negative 32, so we get 2x squared equals 32. And now let's divide both sides by 2. So we get x squared equals 16. And now, so far, what have we been doing? Inverse operations. So what's the inverse of squaring x? Well, that would be taking the square root. So now we get x equals, and since 16 is a positive number, we're going to say x is equal to positive and negative 4. So we would have two real solutions here, positive 4 and negative 4. Let's look at number 2. X squared minus 7 equals negative 7. So let's isolate the x squared. So let's add 7 to both sides. We get x squared equals 0. And now we can take the square root of both sides. And notice what we have. We have x squared equals to 0. So we're just going to get x equals 0, and there's only one solution there. All right, number 3, negative 2x plus 3 equals 27. So let's subtract 3 from both sides, and we get negative 2x equals 24. And now we're going to divide. I think we left off our exponent here. This should be negative 2x squared. Let's get that added in there. There we go. All right. So negative 2x squared equals 24, and we're going to divide both sides by negative 2. So now we have x squared equals negative 12. We are ready to take the square root, but notice what happens. We're taking the square root of a negative. So this is going to be no real solutions because we don't have any real numbers that when we multiply it by itself, it gives us a negative 12, right? Even if I have a negative times a negative, that gives me a positive value. So there's no real solutions when we're trying to take the square root of a negative number. All right, the last example we're going to look at says 25 times a quantity of x minus 4 squared equals 36. So we can go about this the same way. Let's go ahead and divide both sides by 25. And that's going to cancel this 25. So now we have x minus 4 quantity squared equals. Now let's just leave this as 36 over 25 because both those numbers are perfect squares. So we can take the square root of both sides, and when we do this, we can remember if we have the square root of a fraction, we can take the square root of the numerator and the square root of the denominator. We can kind of separate that. So now we have x minus 4 equals the square root of 36 divided by the square root of 25. So let's bring it up here. So now we can say x minus 4 equals square root of 36 is 6, square root of 25 is 5. But remember, this needs to be positive and negative 6 over 5. So now let's take this and separate this into two separate equations so we can solve for our two solutions. So we need x minus 4 equals positive 6 over 5, and we need x minus 4 equals negative 6 over 5. Now we can solve these. So let's add 4 to both sides here. And let's say x equals 6/5 plus, I'm going to call this 20 over 5 because that's the same as 4, right? And we get x equals 26 over 5. And if we wrote that as a decimal, we could do 5.2, right? 25 over 5 and 5 and 1/5, 5.2. Over here, let's add 4. And let's do the same thing. Let's change this to plus 20 over 5. So now we get x equals 14 over 5. And we could do 10 divided by 5, which would give us 2 4/5. So we could call this 2.8. Okay, and that is how you solve quadratic equations using square roots.